At you from the Messy Time Studios. Another beautiful day in Florida, 7th of November, 2022. I am honored and delighted to have visiting us virtually Emily Burns, who's coming to us from Austin, Texas. Emily and I became aware of each other because we were kind of on a similar list group talking about the absolute madness and insanity of the Wuhan panic and all that's come out of it. And so I decided to have her on the show for a chat. So thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks so much, Chris. I appreciate it.
No worries. So I think the thing that would really touch us off well is this absolutely infuriating plea from Emily Oster in the Atlantic that we should all just give each other amnesty for the things that we said to each other during the Wuhan panic. I think she calls it COVID. I'm not sure why. And my reaction, like many, was amnesty for what? I've been screaming since February 2020 that this was overblown hysteria, while totalitarians shut the governments down and locked kids out of school. So now the people that did this to us want amnesty. My blood boils, and I gather you had some cogent thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, no, I felt the same way. I mean, it's just so deeply cynical is the thing that I find so frustrating, because it's so, yeah, obviously, like, we're nowhere near an amnesty, because I mean, an amnesty typically follows a trial, honestly.
Right.
That's
first off, guilt has to be acknowledged first.
But there's no acknowledgement of wrong. There's no, and this, like, and it's just yet another lie. And that's the thing that's so frustrating, right? Is it's like, it's a lie that we didn't know. She knew. You can go back and look at her. You can go back and look at her Twitter feed. She knew that this was wrong. She had the data to argue this, and she pulled every punch. Yeah, she's got, and it's not just her, right? I mean, it's, and honestly,
She's
like,
a professor or something. I didn't bother to check. I just saw that she's at Professor Emily on Twitter. What does she teach? Something? What's her discipline? Is she a doctor?
Economics at Brown.
That's even better. Sorry, go ahead.
But no, I think that we're not at a point that what they're asking for is not even remotely possible right now, because there hasn't been any acknowledgement that it was wrong. And those of us who have been, as you said, screaming since February and March of 2020 that, like, this is absolutely not the right call. The data, and we were acting on data, right?
Correct.
Like, it wasn't because we didn't just have a hunch. We weren't, we were acting on data and pre-existing scientific precepts. And so to say, to perpetuate this lie that we just didn't know,
right,
it's insulting. And the reason, and it's doubly insulting, because it is so purely political. And that's the thing that I find just so nauseating, is that really it's just like, look, guys, just, we just want you to forget about what we did, because it wasn't, it really, we meant well, right? We
meant well, right? Yeah.
And it's just not true. You might have been able to argue that through May of 2020. I think that it's very questionable. But if
that stretched it already, but yeah, I'm waiting in the first stages of panic to give people a little bit of leeway. But by March of 2020, it was obvious this was a bad seasonal flu. Who could care?
Yeah, it was beyond me. But then to see how, actually, interestingly, I remember in, probably about May of 2020, when I was, trying to convince my friends and family to, take a saner course. I thought I'd hit on the perfect rationale that would actually finally sway them, which was that I said, you just have to look at this as a cascade of dominoes, right? So if we don't open up the economy, then what's going to happen come September is the teachers are going to say, we're not going back to school if those guys over there aren't going. Like, why should we be at risk if those people aren't going at risk? Right. And then the kids aren't going to go to school. And then I said, and then Trump's going to be able to run on sending kids back to school, and he's going to win because he's going to deserve to win. I never realized that you could actually, like, run on keeping kids out of school, but that's what happened. And now that happened, right? That definitely happened. Yep. And now we're starting to see how, as these FOIA requests come out, how disgustingly political it was. I mean, we knew it at the time. It was obvious.
It was their last chance to get Orange Man bad out of office, and they didn't care in the slightest. I want to kind of amplify what you're saying, is that what was so insane, right? So I do a lot of quantitative work and statistics for a living, right? And I've got family in Northern Italy. So I was getting statistics in January and February, and I'm reading them, and I'm like, well, it's sad for anybody, but like the average age of death is like 85. And for people who have pre-existing conditions, that used to be called life. And the boomers in America decided in one last thrashing fit of supreme selfishness to sacrifice the children of this nation in the hopes they might eke out a few more months of life. To me, it is a moral travesty. And so when I get into conversations, it's not even about policy and who knew what when. Like, it is categorical to me. Fauci and Biden, these clowns, should be arrested and tried for crimes against humanity. And the fact that we're in this weird position where now we've got a bunch of people who are like, well, you know, we kind of knew, as you point out, we didn't know. It was absolutely clear. The statistics are perfectly clear. And so you saw it from the point of view of, correctly, that kind of political view, but the madness of crowds took over. And from an anthropologist perspective, I'm fascinated by that. Like, people are going to write PhDs on this for decades. How did all these people come to this insane conclusion? And those of us who are like, I'm sorry, it's more dangerous for a child to drive in a car with his or her parents on the highway than it is to catch the Wuhan virus. We're shutting schools? Madness.
Yeah, no, it's, and I think the thing too that sticks in a lot of people's craw is that the people who are saying, oh, we just didn't know, or we couldn't have known, are the people who claim to use reason and logic for everything that they do, that claim to be the arbiters of truth, and yet and who have just, I mean, it was just, you just watched whole swathes of the US population completely abandon every value that they said that they cared about. And, and with not even
without even a blink,
and unwilling to engage in any sort of discussion about, well, hey, you know, when you look at what's happening, like, it's pretty classist, right, guys? Like, I mean, this is like literally like in, you know, infect the poor, protect the rich, you know, to what you said about the schools. I remember at one point, because at one point I got so angry, I was running for Congress, and then my husband, you know, said, yeah, screw this, we're just moving to Texas. But when I was,
I understand your urge, and I understand his rationality. Yeah, having left New York for the last free state in America, Florida, I get it.
And you did it early enough. But one of the things that I really found, yeah, just made my blood boil was I was doing these calls, right? You have to, when you're running for something, you have to call and you have to beg people for money, because it's how you test your message and everything else like that. And so I made this call to, you know, somebody who's nominally Republican. And I mentioned, so I went into my sort of spiel, and at a certain point, and I said, I mentioned that, you know, in Massachusetts, kids had access to just 9 weeks of in-person school in the preceding year, where Florida had access to 40. And he said, but it was a pandemic. It is a pandemic. And I said to him, I said, well, but there was no difference in the results. And he's like, and he just, you know, and you said, like you said, he's a boomer guy who just felt terribly, terribly entitled to his protection, regardless of whether or not it was effective, regardless of whether it was, and it was immoral, even if it were acceptable.
Deeply immoral.
It was absolutely immoral. And I kind of couldn't believe the number of people who felt that was, I mean, if it's not, you know, if we're living in if parts of our society don't see that as immoral, clearly morality is something that societies decide upon, right? Then I consider that part of society to be just largely, you know, putrefying. I mean, right?
Well, I had two favorite slogans that came out of that. My first was, and pardon me if this hurts your ears, because no matter how anyone says it, this is how I hear it. I found the science. All of these innumerate liberal arts majors who couldn't define a standard deviation if you held a gun to their heads would chastise me for being some kind of mean person because they found the science, which presumably I don't know, following what? It was maddening. And you'll notice the moment the mantra "I found the science" ended was when Rochelle Walensky became the head of the CDC, and the science clearly said, There's no danger to children and they should be in school. And the moment she said that, before they grabbed her into the back room and beat her with rubber truncheons and told her to stop saying that. Remember, the first 5 days of Rochelle's tenure, she was rational and honest. And then they beat her up and she stopped being rational and honest, right? And it was just infuriating that the other thing they would say, which they rapidly turned around, was, well, it's important to teach kids to, sacrifice for others. And I said, no, actually, it's not. The job of adults is to sacrifice for children. That's the job. Your job is to suffer so the next generation does better, not to deny them proms and sporting events they worked their whole lives for and everything else because you're afraid. If you're afraid, lock yourself in your house. No one's telling you to go outside. That was what was so infuriating about this. They mandated actions on others when, if you were really scared, move out to the country and don't talk to anyone. No one's telling you to stay in New York or Boston. Go. But they didn't. They shut everyone else down.
And there was and that's the thing too, is I think that there was an opportunity actually for, like, when this first happened, I went and looked at the age stratification, and I thought it was scary for older people. You knew obviously that there's obviously a massive stratification of comorbidities within people who are 65 plus, and that was the part should have been being teased out, that they instead decided to lump in because it made it more confusing, right?
Right.
But I thought, like, what, we should if that's it would have made more sense for us to come together and say, okay, let's, we see that 65-year-old person with comorbidities at the grocery store, let's go sub in for that person. Like, these are the kinds of things that, but it was exactly, that was at no point was any sort of thinking like that. It was a risk-based strategy employed. And that would have made, that's what would have made sense, was like, hey, we'll all come together and we know who's at risk. We'll take the time to get even better and more greater clarity on this, and then give people guidance so they can choose if they want to live their lives or not. And that just, it's I would love to get your perspective on this, because you were in Massachusetts when this was happening. I imagine the insane polarization of what used to be the press. We haven't had a press in the country in 20 years, but their immediate adherence to Democrat Party talking points. I still talk to people I think consider rational, who believe that Ron DeSantis is Ron Death Santis, right? He locked all the nursing homes in February of 2020. He saw the data out of Italy and he realized older people at risk. He shut the nursing homes, only allowed people who've been tested to go in. If you were going to go work a shift, you had to stay there for 5 days and then leave. And he put the National Guard out and protected them. In distinction to, say, Governor Cuomo in New York, who sent infected people back into nursing homes while there were empty naval hospital ships sitting in New York Harbor. And instead of calling that out, they still cheer for Cuomo, oddly, while this drumbeat that Ron DeSantis was about killing people. I just don't know. I don't know. What's your perception of what they think their end game is? If you're going to create this kind of societal discord, what do you want to be, king shit on Turd Mountain? Like, what's the point, in your opinion? Because since you thought of running for Congress. Well, my rationale was more around just trying to reduce the bureaucratic state. But as far as trying to understand their motivations, I'll be honest with you, I can't really, I can't figure it out. I said to friends these are friends that we've since lost, at one point, when they finally saw us after almost 2 years, I said, I don't understand why the people who were on top of the world would break the world. Like, it was working for you. Why would you do this? Like, I just fundamentally don't understand it. And it clearly comes from a kind of hubris. And like you said, I think the end game basically, it was Trump, and yet then Trump was gone, right?
Right, then he's gone. So great, he's out. So let's stop all this nonsense.
Why did it keep going? And I was talking to my husband at some point during the run up to the 2020 election, and I'm not a Trump fan. He's like, I'm a big, I frankly, like 2024, I really hope DeSantis wins. But in 2020, yeah, he was the only choice against, like, it was a vote against lockdowns and against mandates, and the choice was pretty clear. But when I was speaking to my husband about this, I said, I look at this, and what I find so infuriating is if Biden wins, he's just gonna he's gonna open up the economy, like let kids go back to school, and then they're gonna take credit for everything. And my husband said to me at the time, he said, "You should be so lucky.
You should be so lucky." Exactly.
If people,
they got that taste of power and loved it.
And it just makes no sense, right? Like if they had done that, they probably would have been able to, they would have, I mean, I guess the issue is that it would have been a reversion. It would have been, it would have been a retreat from what is clearly a fairly totalitarian agenda.
Oh, yeah, completely totalitarian. They love it. Yeah, no, they love it. Absolutely.
So you can't, once you've got this going, you can't ever acknowledge that you were wrong. You can't ever, know the damage is fine because it's all in support of, some sort of utopia that I'm not even sure they would know how to define. And if they did, would probably scare the shit out of people.
Yeah, they don't. Well, I find it so funny is having, spending a lot of time hunting and largest gun club in America is near me, and is a friend of mine who I deal with a lot of vets. I sit on the board of a foundation for special operations veterans, and we all laugh and say the people clamoring for this chaos are afraid of guns. They're not even sure what gender they are, right? And the people they hate are armed to the teeth and are very good with weapons. Like, it's bizarre. On a practical level, none of it makes any sense. And the problem is that I was talking about this with an old friend, because my grandfather in New York happened to be the head of the firemen's union. He negotiated all the benefits packages with Mayor LaGuardia, like Democrat, Democrat, Democrat. If I explained to him what modern Democrats stand for, he'd look at me in bafflement. Like, none of what he understood a Democrat to be, which was a working man fighting the evil capitalists to get a better share of the economic pie while the free economy created jobs, right? He would be baffled by this. None of it would make any sense to him. You're screaming at me about multiple genders, and you do everything you possibly can. My family has experience, many do. And, I've hated it in the last few years when anyone says Hitler, because that just gets really boring. But the fact that's really relevant is the Democrats' main policy was Hitler's main policy when he came to power, which was to take away the firearms from the citizenry. Their whole goal is to disarm the population while they get a taste of this micromanaging nonsense. Mm-hmm. And again, as all of us are wondering, like, to what end? And I think a lot of it's just, I don't think they know to what end. They just love telling other people what to do, I guess. Very strange. They hate freedom. They don't like individual choices.
No, because they think that we'll make bad choices and they can make better choices for us.
Yeah, with no proof to back that nonsense up, but they keep blindly going forward. What is that great line? Rarely right, but never in doubt. But so anyway, I didn't want to interrupt. So, what from your point of view, what's like really important from here? Like, my mantra is never again. We can't let them declare victory, right? But like, what is your focus now that at least some of the absurdity is waning? What is your kind of biggest goal of trying to make people aware of just how stupid this was?
So it is to make people aware of how stupid this was, and through every possible means. And so I think some of that is via, I think that there's, in order for this never to happen again, we kind of have to articulate what are the ways in which, what are the mechanisms that made it possible. And I think some of that is, some of that's clearly institutional. I think the bureaucracies are just way too powerful. I mean, God, yeah. they clearly just need to be gutted. I mean, they serve no purpose other than to cause harm at this point. But that's not, that's not it. That's not the end of it, right? Like the medical establishment has been awful. The scientific establishment has been awful. And I think, part of that has to do with funding structures, and there's just a lot of rethinking things. But I think too, there's an element that I think is very, very important, which is how did all the smart people, or the people who think they're smart, shut their brains off. And why was that? And that's actually where, you mentioned Hitler, and as I said, I've kind of turned to history for the last couple of years trying to understand, the rise of these kinds of the rise of totalitarian regimes. And I think that, the social approval of the Nazi regime is something that's important to understand, because we all look at it and assume that it's some sort of unique defect of German and militarism, and it's not.
No, they were just more efficient. So to beat out a stereotype, they were just more effective.
I think that so understanding, and I find it very interesting. As I said, I've lost a lot of friends over this, and there are many others where we just avoid talking about anything substantive. So those are hardly friendships anymore, right?
Same kind of thing.
But yeah, they don't want to think about things. They don't want to work through the logic of the consequences of saying that we're going to exclude people from society based on a vaccine, even though we know it doesn't stop transmission. Like there's no possible moral imperative at that point.
Right.
So
it doesn't do anything, period.
Yeah. Like the only possible reason is to just stick it to is to exclude people. And how is that coherent with your other values of inclusivity and equity and all of that? And it's not. And then why do you think it's acceptable to not have to have a strong opinion about something like this without being conversant with the data, right? And these are people who can be conversant with data, and they're choosing not to. They're choosing to be spoon-fed their science by these new secular priests, and if that's okay, but we get to treat like that. You don't deserve any respect at that point, and your viewpoints don't deserve respect. And I think that that's something that we need to come to grips with. And I think that that's something that will happen via, you mentioned, PhD theses and such like that. I think that, scholarship and arts and when we start to tell these stories honestly, I think that's really what needs to come about, right? Is it needs to get into the consciousness, just like you think about how dominant the World War II is in sort of like the general ethos of our thinking, and like this fight of good against evil and totalitarian against freedom. And this is a good time to re-up that, right? And to remember.
I don't want to interrupt. I do want to say that what's fascinating is I just had an old friend of mine on, Brett Stevens, who wrote for the Journal for a long time, now writes for the New York Times. And I think World War II is very dominant in anyone kind of over 40. And I just think that history, they did such a horrible job at not teaching history well in our schools. I don't think it resonates at all for anyone under 30. I don't think they have the horrifying lack of knowledge. It's nothing short of horrifying. I mean, it's Santayana's caution writ large. You ask an average 18-year-old about the Holocaust or about, what was the beaches of Normandy, what was D-Day, you get a blank stare. They don't have a clue. And so I think it's very important that teaching of history and statistics, but closer to home, I'm kind of curious because I've had this same insane either disjunct or argument or just walk away with people I've known my whole life. I swear the people in New York and elsewhere that put up with this crap, they have a version of Stockholm syndrome. Like, it's too personally painful to admit that you were lied to and you locked you and your family in your apartment for 2 years for no reason. Like, I think it's just the mental break that would come from admitting that is worse than just ignoring your friends who understand statistics and say this is nonsense. I really, that's the impression I get. Like, how do you rationalize this? A friend of mine, my daughter is finishing high school and doing a dual degree in college, right? Almost done. One of the kids she started school with, friends of ours, before we left New York, it was so damaging. She's repeating her junior year and they had to move her to a private school. So that family is going to admit that they damaged their child so badly that she's being left back despite doing excellently on her scores. I just don't think that people psychologically are ready for it. It's easier to just forget it and move on, which is a danger, because if they forget it and move on, these totalitarian clowns could say that it worked, and they'll do it all over again whenever they can. They're already trying with monkeypox. Monkeypox, monkeypox. If you are not a gay man who likes group sex and Ibiza on drugs, your chance of monkeypox is 0.0001%, right? But that's Biden's. That describes Biden's health star. God bless him. His lifestyle is his. I don't care. But like, he's on a campaign trying to scare everyone in the world about monkeypox because, gosh, they've loved this control for so long. Sorry, that's my rant. I apologize.
I think it's right, because I think it's a really important point, actually, is how do you get acknowledgement without how do you get acknowledgement from the people who, again, they shut off their brains and they harm their kids, they harm their families, but I do think it needs to happen, and I don't really think that we're sort of free of this until until that starts to become, it's like people now. I think there's pretty general understanding that the Iraq War was a terrible mistake, and but I think it's an easier one to say because we didn't hurt each other.
It's policy, it's complex. They told me it mattered, and blah blah blah. So it's easier, right? Because it's not the same thing as I did this to my kid, unless of course your kid volunteered for the army and went and died, in which case you're really irritated by this. Yeah.
But I do think that that is unquestionably the goal, that is unquestionably what Democrats want, and a reasonable number of Republicans as well. They were fighting the same old things. And you look particularly like the establishment wing of the Republican Party, like my former Governor Baker and Larry Hogan, who both of whom had atrocious records for school closures and extremely draconian. Those guys, they're trying, like, they want to just move on, and they want to forget about it. And they want to say everything they did was necessary. And they also haven't been really hit hard by like the right-wing media, because they have an R in front of their name.
Right.
And it just really shows that, frankly, this has been, I've watched, I come more from the libertarian wing of the party, and I identify as a libertarian, but I've watched a lot of libertarians who really demonstrated that all the things that the left-wing people said about them were true, which is they're just libertarians because it benefits them financially. And so you've just seen a lot of people who have no principles, or certainly where individual liberty is not anywhere remote. It's not even something they value. It's something that they think belongs to them, and for everybody else is too stupid to be able to wield it. And yet they have been the people who have proven themselves too stupid to wield it. Like, that's the thing, right?
My favorite in all this was Arnold Schwarzenegger, former Republican governor of California, puts out this message like, your freedom's not important. And I'm like, bingo, there's the son of the Austrian Nazi. Yep, absolutely. Right. No kidding, Arnold. Really? That's what you really believe? No kidding. And the number of people, my favorite was when, there's so many favorites, but I didn't understand what it was, because I'm not particularly on social media, and I was drawn into a conversation on LinkedIn, which I've since been thrown off of, mainly because, just as a quick aside, LinkedIn allows people to publish anti-Jewish hatred all day long. I criticized that, and they threw me off because I was bullying the Jew haters. So that was fun. That's my little, I've tried to put something in about LinkedIn in every episode so people pay attention. But they were arguing on about this, and apparently, like, one great insult from the left on a message board is, if you say something like, well, freedom is important, and they write MUH freedom, like, whoa, freedom, apparently that's a big put down or something. But I didn't understand what it meant. And so I was trying to like respond to this person, like, I'm sorry, what are you talking about? And then I realized, like, this is some big cutting insult, I guess. But yeah, no, for those of us who understand liberty, freedom is more important than absolutely anything, period. That's it. You can't make any decision, because the moment someone says, you're in danger, I'm going to protect you, that's when they're coming to take away your freedom.
Yeah. it just has been so like it's been so clear, like with all of these encroachments, right? Like every one of these made it so hard to push back, right? So in Massachusetts, where I lived, right, we were under mask mandates from May of 2020 on. In November of 2020, they instituted an outdoor mask mandate as well.
Madness.
Yeah, no, it was utterly insane. There were capacity restrictions. You weren't allowed to invite people to your house more than, outside of your family. You weren't allowed to have groups more than 10 people. And so you were always concerned about whether or not, like, I mean,
The
we couldn't
Gestapo
even
is going to break down your door to look for the 11th man.
The reality is there was such complaints. We couldn't even find 10 people to invite to our house.
Right.
So, like, I mean, I had to go to Twitter and like send out things, like literally like inviting Twitter randos to my house to like try and see if I could like
see if you get a minion.
I mean, it is. I find, and this is all of this. If we'd been able to have reasonable conversations, if there hadn't been these mandates in place, then none of this bizarre polarization could have happened, because we would have talked through things. The people who were terrified wouldn't have come, right? The other people would have, and we would have, and then we could have like sort of slowly brought the other people along and conversed. But when you then become to break the law, when the only way to create any sort of convocation requires functionally breaking the law,
right?
Is I'm not a dissident. Like, this is crazy. I am a dissident, but I am like not your standard dissident.
You're not a dissident until they make a law that makes no sense, and then you are. That's Churchill's great line, right? A bad law is one that makes an honest person a criminal. Nuts.
It's so bizarre. I mean, I read one of my friends, he wrote a post, and he said, and he started it off saying it's very frustrating to be arguing about absolutely everything every single time.
Exhausting. And that's part of their strategy. They want to wear you down into compliance.
Well, but it also does make you think, it's like, surely they can't, they're right on something, but they're not.
No.
I mean, that's the thing. And it's like, and it is all just supported with, like, I mean, once you kind of get the pattern, you just go, and it's like, okay, let's go see what happens. Okay, this is how the trick that's when, and it's just.
The mask thing I especially love, because I deal with a lot of medical professionals, and if you wear an N95, you're a doctor or nurse, right? You work in a hospital, you get fitted every 3 months or so for your N95 mask, because your face might change, maybe, right? You people with beards, it's pointless. That's why surgeons don't have beards, because you can't fit a mask that works. So this kabuki theater of bits of t-shirts spread across your face, never mind asking children who are notoriously sloppy and then that N95 mask, you discard every 30 minutes and get a new one. That's in a hospital setting. If you're not doing that, you are doing absolutely nothing useful to protect yourself or others, and you're actually getting yourself sick, because if you're wearing this dusty, dirty, wet thing that's been on your face for more than 3 hours, you're recirculating pathogens back in and giving yourself nasal infections. The fact that anyone put up with this is just, it is so insane. And when you're in the midst of insanity and you're screaming that that's crazy, and everyone around you is like, you're the crazy one, it's very weird. It's a very strange feeling.
It is. It really is. And so here we are.
What's your big plan forward? What this? There is an unending stream of stupidity that we can chat about. But what is kind of, if you could wave your wand and have people be more receptive, like, what do you think is the most effective practical path from here, given all of the sort of inertial resistance and people, like, what is it that gets us to a better place societally, so that the reality of this is acknowledged by as many people as possible? What's your utopia in terms of at least people how to think about things?
I just think we just need to talk honestly and openly and frequently about it. I think it just can't get. I don't think we can capitulate to the the desire to just kind of move on without saying it was wrong, and acknowledging. I can't see any way that this doesn't end up happening again if we do. And there are some just really serious repercussions that come from this. I wish I had I just think it's like all of this has been, it's just chipping away. Like I remember,
Right.
you know, like you said, you posted that white paper that you sent around. You know, similarly in March of 2020, I was, you know, sitting there kind of doing as much, you know, downloading everything I possibly could, doing all sorts of analysis, trying to understand, trying to put it in perspective for, at the moment, just for my family, but also just being like, what the hell is happening? And wondering why I was having to do this. And I, you know, repeatedly heard from, you know, people, it's like, even if you're right, like, what do you think you can do?
Whoa.
And that's
Yeah.
actually, but yeah,
That's how the power structure wants you to think. They want you to think there's nothing you can do about it.
And it really, to me, one of the really interesting lessons over the past 2 years has been actually like, we do have an incredible amount of power. And particularly when the people who are supposed to be doing this abdicate their responsibility. So when the CDC abdicated its job, people were out, you know, and they were still publishing the data, thank God.
The worst.
Yeah, but because of that, other people gained credibility, and they were non-scientists, they were non-professional people, because we were the people who could risk, you know, our jobs weren't on the line.
Yeah.
And so I think that is something that people need to, that I would like, if I don't think one person can do it, but if everybody internalizes that, every argument, every discussion, every time you say no, when, you know, you walk into a doctor's office and they say, can you put on a mask? Or you just pretend not to hear them, they're not going to ask you twice. Like, it's just the push, the constant pushback creates the space for understanding. And I think, so I don't really think that there's one certain way. For me, we're working on, you know, we're funding research and scholarship in these areas. I think trying to I'm just trying to do whatever I can to find whatever holes in the armor.
I will certainly point people to your Substacks. You've written some brilliant stuff there. That's a helpful jumping off point for them. And so I appreciate you taking the time to come on, because it's you put it very well. So many people in the medical community abdicated their responsibility to truth and honesty and do no harm because of a range of financial incentives. The most infuriating one, just quickly, and I don't know him well, so it's not like I lost a friendship, but we sat in an advisory board together. He is a medical doctor and an entrepreneur and the head of a public company. And so we actually had a couple of arguments about this like a year ago. So in the midst of COVID, supposedly, whenever it's terrified, he didn't give a shit. We all met together in Atlanta. And then he put something up on LinkedIn, which was like, this study proves that masks are necessary. Okay, well, I mean, he's actually a really smart guy, and I respect him. So I read the paper. Well, if you don't take the time to read the paper and you're not fluent with statistics, you might not catch that this paper said exactly the opposite. There was nothing in this paper that claimed masks worked in any way, shape, or form. It was run by the CDC. And it was, the details don't matter, but it was a small N. It was outside, inside, air conditioning, not air conditioning. There was no statistical evidence in this paper that indicated putting a mask on your face did anything. What he meant was, I'm a good Democrat and I want to continue to get grants from the government, so I'm going to write this. And I took him to task on LinkedIn, and he blocked me. But it was so appalling. Like, and that one particularly was egregious because there was no reason for that. You deliberately made that choice to tell this lie. It wasn't like people were calling you. It wasn't like the CBS is calling and asking you for your opinion. Anyway, I hope when people untangle the financial incentives that cause the distorted behaviors, maybe that will convince them, if statistics alone will not. But Emily, thank you so much. Final words. What will you tell people to do if they are still wondering about this? They might be open to a little bit of reason.
So I'd love to connect with people I'm very active on Twitter. It's at Emily_Burns_V. And also I write about this on my Substack, which is, I think you can find it just by Emily Burns Substack, or Relamination is the title. But
We'll put both links below. People can find it easily.
Excellent. Thank you so much. It was great to talk to you, Chris.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And to my long-term listeners, just remember, one more reminder, turn off the mainstream media because they're lying to you, and tune in here.
Learn what Bitcoin is, how it works, and why it matters. Bitcoin 101, your ultimate guide to the fundamentals of blockchain.